And then what I shared as a split screen, I'm gonna have to take your spot if you want to move to yours.
I'm all set up in a corner.
Yeah, and then I'll just tell you when to go to the next one.
Okay. You gotta, yeah, you go to your security and put allow share screen.
Sit here eating this like protein bar because that food that I can smell. This is terrible because I can see that.
I had like a turkey sandwich.
Is it yeah, because it's still saying that you disabled your screen sharing, so you got to change that setting.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So go to there should be a section right by participants that says security.
Reaction. Okay.
And you should be able to just pull up a menu from that.
Enable, wait. And then what do I do there? Okay, share screen.
Yeah, there we go.
Stuff
All right.
that I knew, yeah, it's like stuff I knew, but it like clarified everything and made it so much easier to explain and grasp.
Is that how you want it?
I like small.
Are you able to see me?
Yeah.
Because you don't. Wait, what I meant was like I will be on one side like with just regular Zoom, and then you just pull up the I have the PowerPoint here, so I don't need to see this.
Oh. Yeah, I can make that work. Give me a second. Sorry for the.
That's fine.
Minimize that other screen.
Which one? Oh, I know what you guys are talking about now. This one.
Yes. There we go.
And then we'll do it like that. I think.
Really? Yeah. I can teach it.
How does that look, guys?
That's good. Great.
That'd be all right?
Yeah.
You can see me and you can see the PowerPoint too.
Yep.
Cool. Well, who's I know Christina and Tyler.
Yeah, so I'll introduce you a little bit. So y'all, this is Lucy Hendricks. We've obviously talked about a lot of her material a good bit, and a couple of y'all have met her at the Unicorn events. But yeah, Lucy, I do appreciate you doing this today. Excited to learn from you and apply what we learned. But over here, I'll just let them go through and introduce themselves and say one thing they're hoping to gain from today.
I just took a bite of food, Lucy, but I've met you. I'm Tyler, and a better grasp on, I don't know, I guess on which, like, just kind of what we have up here now on, like, just like feeling abs, feeling hamstrings, and just connect a few dots that I don't have already.
Okay, cool.
Hi, Lucy. I'm Christine. I know nothing about any of this, so this is all just very new, basic, beginner stuff for me. So I'm excited to learn. I'm going to learn everything today. It's going to be new for me, I'm sure. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
And are you wanting, because I know your role hasn't been training, but is that something you're going to transition to?
I don't know. Probably not. Maybe. I don't know.
It's still cool to learn. I meet a lot of people at training seminars that just learn this as a hobby.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, to give you extra context, she's our member experience manager, so to say. And one thing she reached out to me about was wanting to learn more about what we did so she could even better talk to clients about it, or should she ever have to try and sell something to a potential member. So get more autonomy among the team, just kind of knowing what each other's roles are.
Perfect.
All right. Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm the newest member of the team, but I am coming from,
I was a client first, and then I did an internship with Blake. So I'm just now getting to where I'm getting ready to be full time here, and so I'm just kind of like Christina in that I'm just trying to like take in everything right now.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you're here. You're under really good hands. Tyler, how long have you been coaching?
5 years now, I believe. Like close
Okay.
to 5 years.
Cool. And then are you the one that has the most experience other than Blake?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then Blake, how long have you been coaching?
Ooh, 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies, I guess.
Still doing it.
Well, awesome. So what I'm going to do today is teach you a model of how to assess clients, how to look at movement, and then how to program from there. And Tyler and Blake, you are going to notice very similar thought process because we are very similar. So what you'll be able to do with that after this is you'll be able to take what I teach you and then make it your own. Make modifications to the process that you already have, make some changes, take some stuff, leave some stuff off. So I'm pretty confident that you'll be able to learn what you learned today and then just make it your own. So the first slide is a consistent training and assessment model. And not going to talk a lot about that, just a few of the benefits of building a consistent model within a staff, which I'm sure you all already know, is that you're able to share clients. And like, that's huge because you don't want, yes, there's always going to be like different personality types and different coaching styles, like Tyler, and is it Kayla? Is that your name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kayla, you are going to be a little different than Tyler, and that's totally okay. Some people will gravitate towards you and some people gravitate towards Tyler. That is always normal. But what you don't want is for a coach to give a completely different experience to the point where, and I've seen this happen a lot, a client shouldn't have to cancel their sessions when their favorite coach goes on vacation. So Kayla, if you go on a 2-week vacation, or Blake when he went on a vacation, if a client is canceling and they don't feel like taken care of with Tyler, or they don't like the experience, I think that's when the inconsistencies of the training model, the problems arise. The other cool thing of a consistent approach is that you build consistency within your exercises. So very low level exercises look very similar to high level exercises. And we'll go over that towards the end. So that means if a client really gets to nail down the low level exercises, their ability to grasp and understand the higher level ones becomes so much easier. And I know you all work in a semi-private setting, so it benefits you because clients become very independent. And another benefit of a consistent approach, which I'm sure you all kind of already noticed that just because we're so similar, is because people don't need to be babysat, you're now able to connect with clients. I don't know if have you all experienced that? Like, I don't have to babysit my client after I show him one exercise. I show him and he's good. And now I can turn around and ask Janet, how's your weekend? Just because I know clients are there doing what they're supposed to do. So I'm more of like a workout facilitator. I help set things up. I help remind people about things, throw out some cues, but really I'm just sitting there hanging out with people. And what we've noticed is at a subconscious level, the experience of training with us is a very positive experience, because if we're dealing with busy parents, you're probably the only adult conversation that you've had or they've had in that day. So allowing that client independence by having a consistent approach can add that just positive client experience. The other thing, what were you saying?
I just wanted to go and probably just highlight, and you tell us also how much in terms of asking you questions as we go. But that just stands out to me solely from yesterday with some of our longer term ones. They were on their 4th week of the program they were on. So it literally felt like just icebreakers for the whole first 30 minutes because they knew what they were doing. So I think that's what we're striving for sure. Yeah,
it makes your job, like, I literally just feel like I hang out with people sometimes. All I'm there is to just facilitate and make sure everybody's talking. It's a really good experience. And so those are just a few of the benefits of a consistent approach. And the big one for me, and I know this won't be true for a lot of people, is the consistency also allows me or anyone to train the most underserved population in the industry, in my opinion. And that's the people who are very deconditioned, persistent pain clients, or people who are just terrified of exercise. So that same consistency that makes things easy to coach from level 1 to level 3 is also the same consistency that someone in pain needs to be reassured that they can do that exercise. And an example of that would be half kneeling. So because you develop consistency on how you coach things, you could have a brand new client who's terrified of lunges, terrified of doing anything with like a split stance position, having them in half kneeling on their first few days. And then I ask them, how does that feel? I'm like, oh, that feels fine. I'm like, have you ever done lunges? And normally a response that I get a lot from people like them, like, oh no, my knees would never be able to handle that. Or last time I did it, I hurt my knees. So then I'm able to show them, I'm like, well, you're basically doing lunge level 1 right there. So if you can do this, you could totally do split squats and lunges. And then I literally show them how it's the same thing. I get in half kneeling. I'm like, you're doing this here. And then the split squat is just the same thing. Like literally the same muscle, same position. So we just have to be able to bridge that gap. So that's my like biggest benefit of a consistent approach is I'm able to train people in pain and slowly show them that they're capable of doing things. And I'm also able to regress on the fly on the training floor. So if a squat feels bad and they're like, that hurt me, I'm able to bring it back down. And I'm like, how does that feel? Like, oh, that feels okay. I'm like, okay, so you can do the squat. That was just a little too like hard. But see how you're doing the same thing? So always being able to bring that connection back is pretty valuable for someone in pain. So now you never demonize an exercise. You just bring it a step down. So with all that said, if we go to the next slide, we are going to focus on a lot of what I call training floor benefits. So when people get into this breathing stuff, they jump to wanting to do an assessment and then doing a breathing intervention and then an assessment, and you now have awesome changes. Like that's usually the goal. But we have to first start with training floor benefits. And what those look like are having lifting feel good. And I'm sure Tyler and Blake, you've experienced that so many times. You have someone train for the first time and they're like, it just feels good. Like that's a huge benefit. That's huge buy-in. And it had nothing to do with like a table test. Another one, feeling abs versus low back. And how many times have you worked with someone new and they're like, I can't do dead bug, or I tried to do that in PT. I don't have a core, or I struggle feeling my abs. Like that's a problem people have constantly. So that's another training floor benefit or result is they feel their abs instead of their low back. And that didn't happen at a Pilates class or a yoga class or with their old trainer. So that's a huge buy-in. The other one is feeling glutes versus hip flexors. There's so many people when they do this, back in the day when we would do band walks, people would always feel hip flexors and not glutes. So if you get someone to tuck, people will feel glutes, they will feel hamstrings. And most people consider that a positive thing. And then being able to feel someone's upper back instead of their neck muscles. That's also a huge problem with people. A lot of people don't even train their upper body because they just associate it with neck pain. Like every time they've done push-ups, it's always been like this, or every time they do rows. So being able to get people to do upper body exercises without feeling their neck is a huge, huge result. And then decreased pain in general, like getting people to move around on the training floor with minimal pain is a huge buy-in. Nothing to do with a table test. And then big one is increased novelty with programming, which I'm sure you all have noticed. Because people are able to move a certain way and be competent in a certain way, you're able to program more things with them. Like if someone nails down a really good squat, that means they can do an offset squat, a landmine squat, double rack squat. Like you can just do so much when someone gets the positions and becomes competent in moving. And then this one I added increased mindfulness during training. I don't know what your experience has been with this, but clients always feel like our training with us is like meditation, because they have to focus so much that the 45 minutes to an hour that they're on the training floor is like, that was so nice. That was just a break from my everyday life. Not everybody likes to think that much during training. So we do, and we'll talk about backing up on the cues on this, but the people who can handle it, I find that they really enjoy it. What has been your experience with that? Have you ever had someone like, I love how much you have to think?
Yeah, we get probably a mixed bag here.
Yeah.
I think there's like a point that people get to, like once they've really like, kind of like they had their aha moments about it, they will start asking even more questions about like, so what am I looking to feel here and this and that. And then we do have a good chunk that are more like, we basically are coaching conversation on them to this point, because they're like, oh, I just don't want to think, just tell me what to do. And so we have that crowd as well.
Okay, cool. So hopefully after today, you'll have less and less of that crowd. Like, that was way too much, or I don't want to think that much. And then the one that we've already talked about, increase client independence, because you develop these standards that stay consistent, and then clients are just independent. And then the last one is increase range of motion. Even if you never check range of motion on the table or through an assessment, you will see people's ability to move a little better. People will be able to touch their toes. Their landmine angle will be able to go a little higher before they have to arch their back. So you are going to see these positive changes of range of motion just by coaching these things. So then we go to the next slide, where this model, and the way I'm going to describe it, is what I say is a global view of movement and assessment and coaching. And that's like the best word that I've come up with. So if you after this, if you think of a better word, let me know, because maybe it doesn't even make sense. But basically, like the big picture. So that means I'm not going to talk a lot about anatomy. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of the theory of expansion, compression, and muscles and planes of motion, frontal plane, transverse plane, because we need to get the big picture. So if we were to compare being good at this stuff, which I mean is assessment and coaching movement, and we were to compare it to math, algebra is where people like Bill Hartman and Zach Couples are. And then adding and subtracting, that's where most people need to be, which is the training floor, focusing on coaching, getting a global perspective. And Tyler and Blake, you probably are somewhere in between, because you've been doing this for a really long time. The problem is, let's say Christina did want to, and Caleb are wanting to start to do this. If we go to the next slide, the problem is people start with algebra. They start with the really hard courses. They start with the knowledge. They try to use the assessment to guide their training. They try to use the assessment to guide their breathing intervention. And what ends up happening is they run into a lot of problems, which we go to the next slide. And then I hear things like, I can't get clients to buy into breathing. I can't get specific table tests to change. I can't get my coaches to understand what I'm teaching them. And then I can't get other coaches to recreate what I'm trying to do on the training floor. So that means, Tyler, you can't get Kayla to recreate what you're doing, even because you have way more experience, but you just can't get them to recreate what you just did. And the problem is because we're starting with algebra. So that's why I created this, and we're going to start with adding and subtracting. If you go to the next. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, just to help them out too, I think we'd speak to it, but if you wanted to give like just a super quick example of algebra versus adding and subtracting, like if you were to just talk about breathing or anatomy, what that might look like.
Yeah, well, that means if you are in algebra, you're using the table assessment to drive specifically what breathing intervention that person may need. Like exactly what parts of the rib cage need expansion, exactly what parts of the rib cage need compression, and then exactly what shifting different, because everybody is going to be asymmetrical. So what parts of the body need expansion on their left side and what parts of the body on the right side need expansion, and differentiating between those. That would be more algebra. And when
Yeah, I think we had that discussion with Tyler. We were talking the other day where everyone loves as a new coach to go farther and basically go dive into PRI, which is talking about exactly that before someone can even do the basics. So
yeah. And then what ends up happening is they take more and more courses. I've met people who've taken more courses than I have, but then they still don't get results. And that's a problem. Like if someone's taken the intensive, they've taken like 6 PRI courses, and then I am still teaching them how to coach. Like, so I feel like we're jumping ahead. And the reason why I wanted to do it this way, even though Tyler's a little more advanced and Blake's a little more advanced, it's important to know at this level, because this reflects more of how you talk to a client. So even though you two might be more advanced, you still need to be able to talk about it with no anatomy. Like you still need to be able to explain a toe touch to a client without using any anatomy terms. And then the other reason why I wanted to do it is because you two need to remember where you came from. I always make the joke of, I feel like a lot of people, and Blake would be in this group, is I feel like we all went to school together. We all learned how to add and subtract together back in the Mike Robertson era of the neutral spine. And we all just slowly started to view the body in a different way. First, it started out with the PVC pipe. Let's make everybody neutral. And then Mike Robertson came out with this cue, the exhale ribs down. So then I was just coaching everybody, ribs down, ribs down. And I thought the rib cage was just like this 2D version, never even thought of the back of the rib cage. And then like a few years later, all of a sudden we're all reaching. And then a few years later, we're just like hunching over way too much. But then our understanding like slowly, gradually got there. And now we can grasp really hard concepts. And then we have a new trainer and we try to get them to where we're at without really thinking of how we processed all this information. Because the thing is, when someone can't do rock back or someone can't do an exercise, like I can't tell you exactly why I chose a different variation. Like so much of my decision making is intuitive. And I can't teach someone that intuition when I got that intuition from experience. And so that is an example of the next slide. So this is a hypothetical amount of how many times I tried to coach a client to tuck their hips instead of extend their back in 2 years when I did group classes. So this is me doing algebra, or not doing algebra. This is me adding and subtracting. For 2 whole years, I practiced all these moves on the training floor in different positions before I ever tested someone's hip extension on the table and then try to do an intervention. So this is where I think people are really messing up, is you got to get the training floor reps of coaching these movements. So I did 20,000 glute bridges before I ever tested a hip overs test.
yeah.
And so that's where the difference between adding and subtracting and then algebra is. We got to get just the coaching on point. And that's where the intuitive decision making comes in play, because you see the same thing over and over that you start to make patterns in your head, and you probably already do that on the training floor. Like Tyler, I'm sure you have scenarios where you've seen someone with a certain body type, with a certain personality, that they do a certain move and you just have the right cue because you've seen it so many times.
So then there, Lucy, I guess a question I do have is, let's say Blake's gone for like 2 weeks and we have a brand new, like just, I don't know, employee training them. And it's a brand new person. They don't have the experience such as Q. Kayla's brand new. And Blake's been taking a client, especially a like pain client, through a certain drill. I guess at what point does the trainer like step back and let the client do what Blake had talked to them about without the actual like trainer like stepping in? I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm saying in a sense of where Blake's doing something that he's done with the client that's very like advanced, and you've got a brand new trainer who's got to take that person over because Blake's out of town, I'm out of town, whatever. How does that trainer step in?
Getting rid of the advance. So like Blake shouldn't have gone to a point where someone can't recreate. And in that's what so when I developed my onboarding process, which I'll take you through, it was with the mentality of someone without my experience should be able to do the same thing.
Okay.
Levi, the guy who was working with me when I was building this, that's what he challenged me with. Because I was like, oh, here's my assessment process. And he's the teacher. He's the one that taught me how to be a teacher. And he goes, okay, great. But how can someone recreate it without you in the picture?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
And with that said, too, I also don't do a lot of manual cues anymore because new trainers are so awkward with their hands. And I've gotten on Dave about this because Dave is an ex-massage therapist, and I mean, he can get people there like really fast, but then that can't be recreated. So I've even, like, we've had many discussions / arguments of like less hands-on, and now I can use COVID as an excuse, but less hands-on, more mirroring, because new trainers can mirror their clients. Hey, you're doing this and I want you to do this. And that's all I do. I'm like 90% hands-off now because of that, because I don't want to leave and then it's like, well, that was a way different experience. Sierra didn't even touch me, because you can get people there with hands-on. But another reason why I don't like hands-on is then the client doesn't get there themselves. And it's hard for them to even remember how to get there. So you might have given them like 10 manual cues and they're there in this perfect half kneeling, but in their head, I'm like, I have no idea how I got here. So that's another reason why I've backed off on the hands or hands-on cues. Really good question. So let's get started with the global view on movement assessment and coaching. So that's what today is just a global understanding of how to look at movement. And what ends up happening is what you're doing right now, the assessment that I'm going to take you through, the coaching that you're going to go through, the movements that you're going to go through, as you're getting more into algebra, as you get more experience, it's not going to change that much from a training perspective. If you were PT, then it would. You will just have like a deeper understanding of it. So you're still going to check someone's toe touch, and you're still going to do a rock back exercise. But as you get better at this, you're just going to understand better why that toe touch got better after rock back. So what you're doing really isn't going to change much. Like if you look at my training, I'm still doing 90-90. I'm still doing rock back, and it's been almost a decade. But my understanding of it has gotten better. My variations have gotten better. My coaching has gotten better, but things kind of stay the same. So for you, things won't really change as you get better at this. So that means Kayla can follow something, and Tyler, you'll follow something. And yes, Tyler, you might be better at it than Kayla, but if she's just following the same steps, you two should get pretty similar results. So let's go over movement first. Next slide. Someone tell me, what is movement? And you can't read what I wrote at the bottom.
When I think of movement, I honestly just think of like control of what you have access to and maybe trying to gain what you don't have access to, when I just think of like movement overall.
I like it. Take it a step back.
Operating the body that you have and the movement and the ranges of motion you possess.
I feel like that was more like a step forward of complication.
Push, pull, squat, hinge,
Yeah.
rotate.
Yeah, and then what are you doing with all those things? All those different moves.
Putting a stretch on certain parts of the body and creating, I don't know, locomotion by just doing that.
I like that. And pretty much, would you be would you say that you're basically manipulating someone's body into move in certain positions?
Okay.
Cool. So remember, no anatomy here for today. So to me, if I were to look at the global perspective, big picture, is movement is being able to take less space in some areas and take up more space in other areas. And I love analogies. I love comparing things. So if we go to the next slide, if we were a balloon, our body is an entire balloon. Or you can also say like a bag, because a balloon's kind of like a bag. A few things would be true. So the first one is the balloon, whether it's filled up with air, or you can also, what's something else you can fill up a balloon with? Water. And that is more of a representation of us. We're basically a big bag of water. And that's what I want you to start thinking of when you're looking at someone move, is this person is just a big bag of water, and how can I manipulate them into moving into places where I want them to move? And I have a lot of control issues, so that's probably why I'm really good at coaching. It's like I want things to be a certain way, manipulate the body into a certain position. So think of ourselves as a big bag of water. So a few things would be true there. A big bag of water, a balloon filled, let's pretend this balloon that you're seeing there is filled up with water. Is there any empty spaces in there? No. So if you go to the next slide, a balloon doesn't have any empty spaces. So that means our body really doesn't have any empty spaces. Like everything is taken up in our body by blood vessels, blood, fat, skin, tendons, muscles, like everything. Even the empty spaces that you see in things like x-rays, those are occupied by nerves and tendons and ligaments and all these things. So we don't have empty spaces in our body. Neither does a balloon with water. So in order for the balloon to move over, it needs to be able to take up less space in some areas and then more space in other areas. So what that would look like, if you go to the next slide, in order for the balloon, us, a big bag of water, to be able to move, do you see how it needs to be able to take less space in some areas and more space in the other?
So when we use this super complicated discussion of what happens with a descending diaphragm and the guts getting pushed down, it's essentially just saying the guts got to go somewhere, and we have to create more space in other areas for them to go.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yep. And then if you were to explain that to a client, you say stuff.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is, if you can explain it the way I'm explaining it without anatomy, and come up, what I do with my mentees is they have to make a 2 to 3 minute video explaining movement the way I'm explaining it right now. Once you have your base of no anatomy, if you want to add that extra layer of knowledge, you just take your template that you just created and add an extra layer. So for example, what Blake said was the guts. So what I could have said was, you just push everything back. That's level 1. And then I go back and say, and then you push the guts back. And that's like level 2. So you can take whatever you already created and just add that extra layer of anatomy or complication. But if you start from the beginning, at least you have something to build up on.
Yeah, I love that last analogy, Lucy. I appreciate that.
And I do like, even when I'm explaining something, I like to explain things 3 different ways. So that way, Tyler got it when I said guts or posterior expansion. Tyler got posterior expansion, but Christina didn't understand what I said there. So when I said push everything back, that's when she got it. So I do like to explain things 3 different ways in case there's different levels of understanding. So how successful, do you see where it says more space in the balloon? How successful would someone or the balloon be able to move if where it says more space didn't have the capability of expanding?
Not much.
Not much. It will be stuck because it can't push everything over. And then how successful would the balloon be able to move if where it says less space had the inability of being able to compress and deflate?
Not much.
No, it's going to be stuck. So then it would look more like the 360 balloon. It's like, well, I can't expand and I can't deflate. So I'm just sitting there stuck. And the human body, because we're a big bag of water, if you go to the next slide, it's the same thing. So if all you're doing is helping people manage all the stuff on the inside by putting people in certain positions and cueing it a certain way, and you're just manipulating this big bag of water. So Tyler, you tell me, if I wanted to bend back and do a back bend, where would I have to get all the stuff out of?
Out of
Mm-hmm.
the back.
The back side of the body. So the back side of my body needs to be able to compress, or it needs to be able to deflate, or if we're looking at muscles, it needs to be able to contract. It needs to get shortened. And then where does everything need to push towards?
I guess the front, so belly, chest.
Yep. So the front needs to be able to expand, or you could also say inhale, or you could also say eccentrically contract because the muscles are getting longer. And now if we flip over and do the opposite and I want to touch my toes, where do I need to push everything out of and be able to compress, Christina?
The front, the belly.
Front side. Mm-hmm. And then Kayla, where do I need to be able to expand and push everything towards?
On the back side.
Yeah, perfect. So if you were to say one side is inhalation on a toe touch, which side would that be? The front side or the back side?
The back side.
Yeah, because that's where everything expands. Nice job. And then if I were to call part of the body exhalation on a back bend, which part would that be?
The back.
Yeah, that's where everything gets out of, exhalation. So now let's go to the next slide. Now let's start looking at movement on the training floor.
I think this will answer a lot of what you were.
Are you able to see me?
Yeah.
Yep. Like inhale versus exhale.
Yep.
So clearly being able to touch my toes, I need to be able to push everything back. So if I can't do that, if I can't inhale my back and it's stuck in exhalation, like this is what it might look like to be able to touch my toes, because I'm not able to push everything back. So for squatting, what do you think I need to be able to squat? Where do I need to be able to push everything back?
Come on, team.
I'm getting tired. Here, I'll show you what most people do, and you can tell me what I'm lacking.
Yeah, just lacking flexion.
Yeah, my inability to push everything back. So can you see how this means I can't push everything back? So if you can get someone to do a good squat, where do you think they're able to expand?
Into their mid-back, into their backside in general.
Yeah, and then with squat, it would be the whole entire spine.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, in order for you to squat, you need full spinal inhalation.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you need to be able to push everything back. And when you assess someone, you're going to consistently see that. People can't squat down. They have to hinge back. They have to do this. And now it looks like they have an ankle limitation, but it could possibly be the inability to expand their back.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's like
So that one can be pretty easy to see. Like you can see the flat back and then someone being able to round their back. The overhead press is a little harder to see, so that's the next one. But again, it's just manipulating the inside of your body. In order for me to press overhead, my shoulder blade, so if these are my shoulder blades on my back, my shoulder blade needs to migrate over to my armpit. So that means the front of my chest and the back of my back needs to be able to expand to move my shoulder blade over there. If I can't do that, that's this. People are shrugging. Another thing, in order for me to press overhead, where do you think I need to be able to deflate? What parts of my rib cage?
Your the sides of your rib cage.
This side needs to be able to compress and then push everything over to this side. And I'm exaggerating. If someone can't expand front to back, if they can't expand their chest and they can't expand their back, that's when you're going to see the shrugging in the landmine press. That's why landmines, like going not as overhead, can be very beneficial. So that's all you're doing. What'd you say?
That's probably why for our team here, why we talk about like overhead pressing can be a big limitation, whether any of what they present with that we talk about, like narrow, wide, inhale, exhale, whatever anatomy you wanted to use, overhead pressing can be difficult for both crowds because of where their airflow goes to.
Yeah. And then if you just coach it with a stacked rib cage, you're going to be able to unlock a lot of those moves that you see people struggle with. So far we've gone over squat, which means you need the full back to expand. So you got full spinal inhalation. And then we went over overhead press. So that requires you to be able to expand from the chest and your back. And we go to the next one, split stance, or you can call that split squat. Now we're going single leg. What part, so this is my right side, and this is my left. What parts of my body am I really getting some inhalation or expansion? If I'm doing a split squat. Right side, left.
You gotta expand your like left side and just compress on the right.
So if we go back to the squat here.
Back.
Yep. Now, split squat, is it my right side or my left?
Right, your right side.
So technically on a split squat, you're achieving more inhalation on the right side with whatever leg you have in front. So unlike the squat where it's both legs. And then we move on to downward press, which I do more of now because now I know that it expands the upper back. So if I were to do a downward press, very similar to the overhead press where the shoulder blade migrates over to the side, the shoulder blade needs to migrate over to the side on a downward press. In order for you to be able to do that, you need to be able to expand front to back. The difference between a downward press and an overhead press means when you're overhead pressing, you are going to bias more the front of your chest. And if you're downward pressing, you are going to bias more of the posterior thorax. But honestly, it's not that important because as trainers, and this is just my biased opinion, as trainers, you are going to work on everything. You're going to do an overhead press. You're going to do split squats. You're going to do squats. You're going to do downward press. You're going to do upward press. Like you're going to do all the reaching, all the lower body exercises. So even though a client may need more expansion in the back than they do the front, you're going to address it eventually. And that's how I see it. And that's why I don't get so hung up on like the assessment needs to tell me because I'm going to deal with it eventually. PTs, that's a different story. Like it behooves Zach to really know exactly what exercise to give that person because he only wants to see people for 3 or 4 weeks. We get them twice a week for a whole entire hour. Like we get to work on so many things that look like just training. And that's my biased opinion of why I haven't been getting hung up on the assessment so much. So, which takes me to my next point. Next slide. We basically get to address everything. So we get to address breathing in all positions. And what I mean by that is a good exhale with a good inhale in the supine position, in the quadruped position, in the side lying position, in a half kneeling position, tall kneeling position, squat, split squat, step up, like just deadlift. So we get to address the normal mechanics of respiration in all these positions. And if you go to the next one, we get to address the hip position in all these positions. Like we do supine 90-90, glute bridge. We do quadruped. That's where we teach the tuck there. And then half kneeling, tall kneeling, split squat, step up. It's just like all the same exercises. And if you go to the last one, we get to address all the reaching in all different contexts. We teach a floor press. We teach a double floor press, seated landmine, seated press, seated downward press, pull downs on all different angles, alternating pull downs. So we get to address all the different reaching in all different contexts. And then so anything that you would find on the assessment that dictates all these different limitations or unique limitations that someone may have, as a coach, you're going to address it if you work on coaching.
Yeah, so I just want to hit on this, that kind of what I'm hearing is you've pretty much applied to respiration the same that everybody applies to like your basic movements in general, right? Like we always say in our basic movements that we got to learn how to push, pull, squat, split squat, hinge, et cetera, et cetera. And so instead of being like, oh yeah, I'm going to start this person on this based on the assessment, you're saying, oh, well, I just need them to, you know, be able to expand posterior, you know, anterior, side to side, all of those. So it's almost just like saying they're going to get exposed to all the movements in general. Let's just be good coaches.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what I'm hearing. And that, you know, like, cause I think that echoes with like, we went a solid 2 years where we weren't really assessing people at all anymore. We were just making sure our programming was hitting the very base of what everyone's going to do. And if one person is more advanced, they just get to load sooner or go to the harder variation. So that's kind of what I'm hearing and how you're approaching respiration as well.
100%. That's exactly what I'm hearing. And when I came up with this last year, I was like, I don't even, I was saying it at my seminar. We had like 30 people. I'm like, I'm just questioning the need for an assessment at all. And then someone's like, I'm going to tell Zach you said that. And I was telling Zach about it. I was like, I really don't think trainers, if you just coach all these positions and you make sure they nail these positions down, why do you even need an assessment? And he's like, thanks, Lucy. Just don't say that online. But since we started doing that, I used to get called in a lot because I am good with the assessment and I am good with the interventions. Dave and my old employee used to call me a lot on, hey, you need to address this issue. You need to address this. And since we did our onboarding the way I'm about to show you, we don't run into those issues anymore. And another thing too that I wanted to bring up, just because you've been doing this for a while, Tyler, is a lot of people talk about the asymmetries of the shifting hips and all of that. I was so obsessed with that. And
That's
I
where
think
I'm at right now, and I just talked to Zach a couple weeks ago about it, and I'm like, oh shit, I just gotta focus on abs and hamstrings, and it's probably gonna clear up. So
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. And he's the same way. He says the same thing of he used to do all the shifting, now he doesn't, gets better results. But what he doesn't have that I do is I have the same people, because he's a PT and doesn't keep people forever. I had people I've had people for 7-8 years now, and some of those people were there when I was obsessed with PRI, and I would shift the shit out of them, like so many exercises, always left IC adductor and all these references.
I've been doing that for the last like 3 months, so this is great to hear. Thank you.
And the same people that had these crazy asymmetries, like they would hinge And from the front of the view, it was like this, or their squat was very shifty. The same people that I tried to shift with all those exercises now no longer shift, and I just got better at exhale, reach, and tuck. I just, like what Zach said, I just got better at the stack position.
Cool.
And it's been cool to see because, one, it makes it easier on me. But two, it was cool to see that I finally got results with people that I did try to do all the asymmetrical stuff. And
Yeah, I think this is good for me to hear too, because Tyler mentioned, like, I think I fell into that where it's easy, and this is to a fault of mine, where the team's like, oh, I just can't figure out why this person's still hurting when they're doing this. And I'd roll in and give them like 2 or 3 different interventions, and then they're magically like moving and feeling better. And that can be frustrating for a team member, because then it's like, I don't know what the fuck you did, you know? So I think that's kind of what I'm hearing here, where if you just go back to, just shift to the positions we talk about. Well, did they own their stack? If they haven't done that, then let's come back to that. So I appreciate this last 10 minutes big time.
Good. And then you would just regress that person just like you would any other person and see, is that okay? And then show them, versus trying to bring this crazy intervention that I used to do all the time. Yeah, well, I'm glad that was helpful.
Yeah.
What was I talking about?
You're on the part on the side with reaching in all positions.
Yes, I don't do that anymore. I just really work on the stack position in all positions, all different contexts, supine, quadruped, half kneeling, and all of that. So with all that said, we are now going to move on to the sheet that I sent you all.
Oh, she already got it. Here it is.
Yeah, so on this one, you don't really have to see me. So I still do an assessment, even though I went for a while thinking maybe I don't need one. But the assessment is still valuable because it still increases buy-in. Because if a client can't touch their toes and then they touch their toes after an intervention, that's major buy-in. But I'm also biased because I have people in pain. So these people have already gone to chiropractors, massage therapists, where they've done similar ranges of motion tests. So to them, that's a very valuable thing. So this is day 2 when someone comes in with an assessment. This assessment doesn't tell me anything about who that person is on the training floor, which is why it doesn't guide my training. Because I could have someone with limited shoulder flexion and they suck at landmine pressing, and I can have another person with limited shoulder flexion, but landmine is fine. So I just can't use the assessment to say, oh, this person's going to be good at this, this, and this. I have some people who can't flex their hip at all, but then I give them a weight and their squat looks great, or a bar and their squat looks awesome. And then someone else with the same test numbers, totally different person on the training floor, like very uncoordinated, everything hurt. So I just can't use this to guide my training. So what this does for you as a global perspective, it tells you you're going in the right direction overall. So what that looks like is I test someone's, and we'll go through this fast at the end. I'll go through the whole thing first. I check someone's toe touch. I check someone's squat. And then I go through a leg raise. Or would it be helpful if I go through it now, Blake?
Depends on what you were trying to do after. I know you and I have walked through this. I think, like, I've taken Kayla through similar of like showing her the assessment. I think a big help from you would be how you go about intervention and the breathing. So if you probably dedicated more time to that and more like high level overview of what actually is in the assessment might help.
Yeah, because you can easily take someone through this
Yeah.
and show them how to do a leg raise.
Right.
So this is my assessment, and that can be, you can do any assessment you use as long as you have a process for it. But then after I take someone through the assessment, the only thing that really tells me where the difference is going to be is whether someone is wide or narrow. And the infrasternal angle tells you like the dimensions of people's rib cage, and it just tells you the breathing strategy that this person is going to be more successful in. And that's usually about the only thing that I use to change my process. But everybody still goes through the same thing. So once I take someone through the assessment, I now introduce the breathing. And what you'll see is I go so slow. It's one step at a time. It's like if you were to take a salsa dancing class, it's like step forward and then step back, step forward and then step back. And it's like, get good at this, like feel this, instead of adding 4 steps, which my salsa dancer instructor did, and I lost it. Like it was way too much. And I've really trying to learn new skills has made me change this, because I feel uncomfortable and frustrated when someone introduces too many things at once. And I think we do the same thing with breathing. So what that looks like is someone does the assessment, and then we go over just the exhaling. That is it. So I say, okay, Janet, so you're gonna lay here and you're gonna take a breath in through your nose, and then you're gonna full breath out, exhale, exhale all the way out, and then just breathe in however. And then I let her practice that like 4 times, however she is doing it, whether it's wrong or halfway right. And then I kind of cue her into more of that, like go a little longer, or open your mouth. And just go even longer. Think of getting all the air out. You're deflating your whole body. And I'm literally just saying the same cue 20 different ways that I can think of until something resonates. And then as she's practicing, she probably hits 10 to 15 exhales. And so I make sure that went well. Most of the time it does when I break it down this way. But what do you think I'm going to do if that didn't go well at all?
Yes.
And I'm dealing with like a fat loss client, and I'm like, all right, full exhale. And they're like, I'm like, awesome. Can you get more air out? I'm like, great. Can you open your mouth? And they're like, what do you think I'm going to do now? Like they couldn't even get step 1.
Then you're gonna go simpler with their programming overall?
Yes, but I'm not even going to continue to go through all of this, and I won't even go back to the assessment. They won't even notice that you won't go back to it. Like if it was that bad, just trying to get them to exhale, and I tried my best, it's like, okay, awesome. And let's say they're a fat loss client. I'm like, okay, so here's like a general warm up where we do like cat-cow and half kneeling, like no more breathing. And then push the sled, single arm carry, and we just kind of move around. And now I met that client where they're at. So I've avoided the whole confusion, like I don't care about this. But you will see those people less and less if you do introduce things slower. Because I used to get a lot of those people. Now it's out of all of our onboardings before the pandemic, we had 1 person like that out of 15. Everybody else was able to go through the whole thing. But then we had that 1 person who like looked around, couldn't even get an exhale. And I looked at Sierra, I was like, no more breathing. Like, go half kneeling, go push a sled. And now you're meeting that person where they're at. So they do a few exhales and I'll say, perfect, that was awesome. Now I want you to fully exhale and hold your air out for about 3 seconds. And I have them practice that about 10 times. And about halfway, I check in and I say, hey, Janet, are you feeling a little abs while you're holding your air out? And I get that confirmation of like, yeah. And if they say, no, I don't know what you want. What? I'm like, okay, just exhale a little longer, because I want that confirmation that they're feeling abs. So once they give me that confirmation, I'm like, okay, cool, pay attention to that. So all they're paying attention to is that full exhale, holding on to the tension, and they feel the abs, and then they just breathe however. And then I stop. I'm like, that was awesome. Take a break. Cool. So now, same thing, but when you breathe in, you're going to hold on to that tension, and the one that you told me you felt. And then as they do it, about half the time the client gets overwhelmed, and I'll literally laugh like, oh, this is the hardest part. You probably won't get it today. So if it really threw them off, I just back off that cue and I'm done with the keeping the tension. We're just working on that full exhale. Hold. If they do well, I'll keep it there. And then I'll say, okay, awesome. That was the breathing component of the exercise. That was really good. Now we move on to the tucking component. So I can't see myself. Okay. So they're on a table, a 90-90, And by this time, they've done probably 35 exhales. So they're on the table, and I say, okay, so now you're gonna drag your feet down and roll your hips up a little bit every time a client does this. And I let them do that because at least that gives them the idea of like what it's like to pick up their hips. So I'll say, oh, that's great, keep doing that. Okay, so now you're gonna pretend the bench has wheels on it and you can't let it roll away from you. You have to keep it underneath you. And then roll your hips up a little bit. So keep your low back on the ground. And then usually they still do it wrong. And I let them do that again. And then the third time I say, okay, that was good. This time think only the tailbone coming up. And that's usually where they get the roll. But if that doesn't happen, and we'll talk about this after, I back off on the picking up the hips. And I just go with, so this time, don't even let your hips move. Just drag your feet down a little bit. So at least they're getting some hamstring when they do the exercise. But if they are able to do it, I have them go the last time, roll up a little slow, and I'll tell you where to stop. And once I have them where I want them to be, I say 5 breaths. And by this time, they should be able to do the 5 breaths because we just went through it 35, 40 breaths. And now they go through this 3 sets of 3 to 5. So by the time I do another test on the assessment, they've gone through about 30 to 40 practice breathing sets, and then they go through a full-on 3 sets of 3 to 5 breaths in 90-90. And every time I have crazy change on the table. Like 95% of the time. We've had people cry. They just feel so different. And that is, I think, a big problem that people don't get enough quality breaths, that there's just barely any change. And then the client's like, I don't know what that was for. But if you can increase someone's toe touch, and then their leg raise increase, and then their shoulder motion increase, and then their hip flexion increase, you point that out. Be like, damn, those are great changes. Nice job. And I probably said that to you, Blake. You changed really fast. That was really good. Nice. And then like they did it. You didn't do anything. I didn't even touch them. And that's my retest or intervention and retest. And that's it. I don't go back to the assessment. So that's the assessment component. And everybody goes through this the same thing. But there is one little difference. If someone is a wide infrasternal angle, sometimes laying on their back is very hard, because if you're a wide infrasternal angle, the dimensions of your rib cage are bigger from side to side. And laying you on your back is squishing you from side to side even more. So they're gonna have a hard time getting that full exhale. So the only difference here is I sometimes put wide infrasternal angles on their side, so then they can get squished from side to side or front to back. But not always. Sometimes wide infrasternal angles are totally fine on their back. And this is not an absolute, but the pattern that I notice is the people who struggle on their back are the super stiffed guys, the beer belly or the beer belly, barrel chested, very stiff guys. You ask them to exhale and they're like that. Those people do better on their side. But then you also have the wide infrasternal angles of people who are just overweight, very deconditioned. When they exhale, there's like nothing going on here. Those people I find that do well on their back. It's like the super stiff people. But again, not always. That's just a pattern that I've noticed. Questions on this part? So this is just letting you know I'm going in the right direction overall. Like you just created some buy-in, you just created some positive change. So obviously you increase some range of motion. And I wrote here client specific. That's something maybe like a client's like, it bothers me to do lunges or it hurts to do this weird move. That's where I write that stuff down, because then I have them recheck after. So if we quickly go over, like from a global perspective, what these things are telling you. Tyler, tell me, what is a toe touch telling me?
I mean, you could go as just like simple as do they have tight hamstrings? Are they tight in this place?
More like a bag of water.
You talking, this person is very, I guess like inhaled is the word there, or like exhaled.
Exhaled. Yep. And to make it easy, toe touch, squat, and hip flexion, pretty much telling you the same thing. Not really, but it is helpful to see it that way. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. So toe touch. If I can't expand in my back, I'm not going to be able to touch my toes. So if I can touch my toes, that means I'm able to expand into my back. Same thing with squat. If I can't expand into my back, I'm not going to be able to squat. So if I can expand into my back, I'll be able to squat. Hip flexion, same thing. And I don't check overs anymore. I just check hip flexion. And it creates more change too, so better buy-in. I'm basically a laying down squat now. So if I can't expand into my back, I'm not going to be able to flex my hip. So it's going to be stuck here. So if I can actually flex my hip, what needs to happen?
If you can flex your hip or if you need to,
If I need to, what needs to happen?
you got to be able to get expansion into the back.
Into the back. So they're all pretty much the same. So if you get the expansion into the back, you should get some changes in those moves. And then the last one where it says ISA, if someone can't have a dynamic infrasternal angle, that means that they lack some mobility in the rib cage. So a narrow can't open up. They don't have transverse abdominis and internal obliques opening up, getting the rib cage to be flexible from side to side. And then the wide is the opposite, can't bring it back in. So that from a global perspective, that's pretty much what these tests are telling you. But everybody will go through the same thing, or at least I take people through the same thing. And then back. But back to this tells me nothing about what that person can and can't do. So now this is also day 2 with me. This is movement observations. So this is me literally just seeing who these people are. Like who do I have in front of me? And what kind of exercises are they successful in? What positions are they successful in? Because this is really going to tell me how to modify their first program to meet them where they're at and give them exercises that they feel good in. And they're being challenged, but I'm not overwhelming them with cues or feelings of like, I just always feel it in my neck. Like no matter how much you tell me to not use that, I still feel it there. That's when people start to get frustrated. So here are the moves that I look at. I look at 90-90 and then I look at hook line tucking. So I already looked at the 90-90 and I write on, I'm looking how well did they do it? Where did they feel it? So here I wrote some of the questions that I'm asking myself when I'm looking at these exercises, because then I have to write notes. So that way Tyler can see the notes that Blake wrote, so you come better prepared of how to coach this person on their first day. If they can't do hook line, because most people struggle in hook line and versus 90-90, I'm not going to give them glute bridge. I'm not going to put it in their warm-up. I'm not going to put it in their workout just because I know they're going to suck at it, so I don't even want to put them through it. Then I check 90-90 reaching. So I don't even do anything with the legs. They're still laying there. And they reach up. And here I'm checking, where do they feel it? How are their upper traps? Were they able to reach? Because if they can't do that and all they felt was neck, what's something that you might not give them on their first program?
You're not going to give a lot of things with a lot of big time reaching.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm not going to put arm bar on there, like single arm bar, which I love to do that for the beginner program. But if all they felt was neck, I'm just not going to put it on there. So I pay attention to how well did they do with the reaching in the supine position, where did they feel it, And then how well were they able not to shrug? And then if they're wide infrasternal angle, I put people on their side sometimes. There I'm paying attention to how well were they on their side? Were they able to tuck? Because if they weren't able to tuck, I will write that on there and we won't cue it. Because maybe it was fine for them to exhale and get some abs in that position, but I tried really hard to get them to tuck and they just weren't able to do it. So I make those notes so we don't cue it. And then I look at people's quadruped position, because some people do really well and some people can't not shrug. So if I put someone in quadruped and they have shoulder pain or elbow pain, and you can't get them to not do it like this, are you going to give them ab exercises like planks and bear crawls and stuff like that? Probably not. You're going to give them more dead bugs and wall press abs because they were successful in those positions. I just kind of check out how well did they do it in quadruped. And then cat-cow. I don't always do cat-cow, but I usually do cat-cow if the client is just can't do 90-90 and they can't do a lot of things. And I pay attention to where are they getting their movement from. Because there are times where I put someone in cat-cow and then all of the things that they suck at finally make sense. So if I have someone on all fours, and this is how I coach cat-cow. I say, okay, so you're gonna get on all fours. I don't coach the upper body much because I don't want them to pay too much attention. And I say, it's gonna be like a less exaggerated cat-cow. So I only want you to move through your hips. So you don't move anything else. And then if the client does this, that means that they literally can't move through their hips. So all the other exercises that I'm trying to get them to tuck or do a squat or do certain things, it starts to make sense of why they can't do it because they don't have that motion. So cat-cow does give you an idea of like where can people move from when you ask them to move from a certain spot. And then rock back variation. I want everyone to do rock back, but one variation doesn't work for everybody. And I can't tell you why or what assessment findings you're gonna find. So what I end up doing is I have like 3 Eric's pads with me when I show rock back. And I start with regular rock back here. And if it doesn't look good, I just play around until it does. I'll put a pad underneath their elbows. I'll put a pad underneath their, or between their stomach and their legs until it looks good. And then I write that on there. Like 1 pad underneath elbows and 1 pad between legs and stomach. And that was a good rock back variation where they weren't shrugging and their spine looked nice and smooth. And then I look and see how seated landmine press is, because that's usually an initial upper body lift that we start with. And I just want to see if they can press the 15-pound bar without shrugging. If they can, I'm going to leave that in their program. And then I look at their half kneeling position, because sometimes half kneeling looks good, but sometimes half kneeling, even with support, they're so unstable that they're like this. And I hate it when it's like that, so I don't even put half kneeling in their program if they're that unstable. And then I look at the squat variation. I always start with ramp squat hold. Do you all know which that one is? It's on a ramp holding onto a barbell. That's my favorite variation, but sometimes that doesn't work out because people are so conditioned to bringing their knees back. Even though I'm telling them bring your knees forward, they won't do it. They always hinge. So those people, I like to put them on the wall because then I can manipulate where their feet go. And then when they squat down, their knees have to go forward. So that's why I wrote that on there, is do they do better with the squat ramp or do they do better with a wall squat? Or maybe they're just so deconditioned that they can't do either of those and I've already crushed them with everything else that we just do a short seated exercise.
From a programming perspective here, and I think I could probably have quite a long conversation with you on this, but would you just go ahead and assume, if we like went a little more nitty gritty here, and we just assume that the majority of people are presenting to you with narrow rib angles that you could almost, or may already do it, like program, like if you didn't get a chance to assess people that walked into your gym and program from that perspective, that you could start programming with these very things in mind and more of like a narrow approach. That's kind of what we've been talking about more of. Assume narrow, adjust to wide, because you can still get changes in a wide even by doing narrow approaches and just doing good breathing too.
Yeah. And so you're saying, like, if you just took them through this instead of the assessment, would you be able to?
Well, more like if you just were aware of these things, you know, as an example, like if you started the majority of people in quadruped, like kind of just from our understanding of like a wide angle might struggle more in like a true quadruped position versus doing better with things like a dead bug where you can get a little bit of more of a reach or things, you know, backwards reach or whatnot. But I'm just kind of thinking from a simple programming perspective, keeping all these in mind, of that you can just kind of start making a lot of assumptions and then working out of that as well and just looking for these things. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, it does. The only reason I would say I would still do it before, just as like a discovery mode, is so you don't program things that will frustrate the client.
Right.
Because maybe the client, if someone doesn't take cues well, they're going to be pretty frustrated with me over here because everything was uncomfortable. But by the time they come in, I've already adjusted all these things that they shouldn't feel uncomfortable. So that would be the only reason that I would do this first, to get a true assessment of who you're dealing with. Because even though you can make a lot of assumptions, you still don't know how that person's going to react in certain positions.
Yeah, so you're basically saying you rock through the initial assessment, take them through the breathing, and then these are your exercises, so to say, that you're taking them through.
Yeah, and then to me, this is like the true assessment.
Right. Yeah, actually seeing how they move with what they presented with on the table.
Yeah, because I don't know why a client may be really fine on rock back where upper traps feel like jello and they get a nice, beautiful reach, but why it looks like shit in quadruped. I don't know why. So that's why I like taking, like making sure I'm looking at every position just so I program accordingly.
Right.
This takes me about 30 minutes, and then this takes me about 30 minutes, or the movement observation. So I have about 45 minutes to an hour with that person. And the other things that I'm paying attention to that I write down for Sierra and Dave to look at in this session is how well did they take cues? How did it feel how did everything feel when I asked them where they felt it? Were they able to carry over cues from one exercise to another? Because some people can do that. Some people I can say the same tuck that you just did and they get it. Other people don't. And that way, when Dave trains them their first session, he knows not to just assume that they can do it because I already wrote it down. So we're already like matching that person where they're at when it comes to cues. And the other thing that I notice is, did they need to be demoed each exercise each time they did it? Some people, it's as simple as go back to your squat. Because I'll go through these like in a little circuit. They'll do 2 or 3 rounds of each. And sometimes I can just say, oh, go back to rock back. And I'll just like do that and people get it. Other people literally need that 1 second of go back to rock back, this one exercise. And I pay attention to that. So I write that in the program so the coach knows that they need to demo that exercise so the client doesn't feel lost and frustrated. Some people, it's very simple. Like go back to the ramp. Well, to them, that's not enough. Even though they already went through it twice, you have to like the ramp with the squat, with the tuck. So an example of what this looks like. Jane comes in and in 90-90, she struggled in hook lying, only felt her back. And the 90-90 was better on the wall where she didn't feel knee pain. And then we did 90-90 reaching and her upper traps were extremely toned. She felt her neck the whole time, even without weight. We didn't do side lying. And in quadruped position, same problem. All she did was felt upper traps working. And then we didn't do cat-cow. And then with rock back, the variation that worked well where she didn't feel her upper neck was with 2 pads underneath her elbows. Upper traps felt soft then, and she was able to get like a really nice reach. And in seated landmine, I did not even try it just because of how much she struggled with reaching. But I tried the pull down, and that looked fine. And then half kneeling, she was able to do it with a bench, and that looked well, but I had to give her the bench for her to feel comfortable. And then the squat variation, she was really scared to bring her knees over her toes, and she kept hinging, even though I kept telling her to bring her knees forward, but the wall squat worked well. So that was my true assessment of who I'm dealing with, not the assessment, the actual assessment. So you now tell me, Tyler, because you probably know these names, how would you modify, because this is our template for their day 1, how would you modify knowing these answers over here?
That's a tough one. It's a big one here. For a 90-90, if she's having a lot of tone in her traps and can't really get the tuck, I guess I would, I was about to say like hook line, but obviously if they don't have the tuck, there's no way that's going to happen.
Yeah, and she was fine. She was fine with 90-90 on the wall.
Okay. So she was fine with that, and I'm trying to actually get her into what position?
90-90 on. So this is basically what I wrote as my template that every new person goes through.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just used the assessment findings or the movement findings, and I just modified to what I noticed.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so she has the tuck, but then with the reach, I guess you could try certain angles with the reach. So maybe she could reach down and away from her body, and that's going to take that just like tone away from her traps that she's feeling.
Yeah, if I had written that on here too, it's like, but she was fine with downward reach. And then I don't know why it's not typing. So here I would go downward reach, and I would write that on the comments because maybe Dave is going to train her. So my goal is I wouldn't have to talk to Dave about this. He should be able to train her accordingly with my notes and with my modifications. So, so downward reach with her fingers touching her knee. That way they were kind of like supported.
Yeah.
So if I did that and that worked well, I write that on here. And then half kneeling forward lean, I wrote on there that she was able to do it, but not until I put a bench on there. Because what I don't want is for the client to remember something because I didn't write it on there, and that's happened in the past. It's like Dave will show them half kneeling, and they're like, well, Lucy had something on here, and then I didn't write it on there. That makes us look bad. So I always try to remember like writing the modifications on there so then Dave knows to put the bench on there. So on here, I would write with bench and front. Same thing with rock back. What did I say worked well for her?
Being up on pads.
Yeah, and if I wouldn't have written that on there, now we expect the client to remember. And so Dave shows them rock back and it's all hunchy and they're like, well, Lucy like did it with something. I don't know, I forget. So it's like we have to make sure we're writing all these things down so it looks like they're being trained by the same person. So with 2 pads, elbows, and then same thing here. I didn't do ram squat hold, or I did, but it failed. So I would go to wall squat. And then I also didn't do landmine. I did pull down. And I would also write the weight that I did so Dave knows. And that's my first semi-private with a client. And that's how I use what I saw the first day and modify our template that we already
I
had.
have a question here.
Yeah.
A logistical thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've been using True Coach. Are you using it for your in-person, or were you planning to?
We are planning to.
So that is probably my biggest question with this, and something that we've been trying to figure out. I know True Coach allowed, this is probably just worth another discussion, but the comments part and figuring that out is where it's tough, because we've actually noticed it's easier to make all our changes with all our group people who are on paper and they can see what was written before, versus our digital. If we make a change, like changing the 90 to a different move, then we have to go and make the change to 5 other weeks in their program. So that was my only logistical. Make sense? More so, we don't have to talk about it now, but I was just more so putting that in your ear as something to chat about in the future.
Yeah. Well, that's on my list to do this week, is figure out our programming. Because we don't know if we're going to keep paper program for in-person and just use True Coach to manage metrics and home programs and vacation programs. So yeah, we can chat about that later.
Yeah.
And then so that, what this is this is their first semi-private. And the way we explain it is you come in, you're really paying attention to the positions, the lingo, because what we find is people are a lot more successful with our programming if they have a day where they just really learn this. And I mean, this can be a pretty tough workout for someone who's deconditioned. If I have someone who's a fat loss client who's less deconditioned, they still go through this, but I add a finisher at the end to just give them a little bit of what they want. But I don't really deal with those. It's very rare for me to get those people. And then this is where I ask the client, just because of the people I work with, but I know you all work with the deconditioned population. At the end of this workout, so it's their first semi-private, I go up to them and I ask, on the scale of 1 to 10, how crushed are you going to feel after this? 10 means you feel like you're not going to be able to walk tomorrow, and 4 means you're fine. And this is very interesting because perception plays a huge role in how crushed they're going to feel. Most trainers have already grown the tolerance to exercise, which means you know that when you're about to throw up, you know you're not going to die. Like, I've ran so much that I've thrown up. And in gymnastics, I mean, I trained like 25 hours on a weekend. Like, I crushed myself. So when I crush myself at the gym, or I feel like I'm going to die, I know I'm not going to die. People who have never trained before, their heart rate going up a little bit, muscles burning, to them, their perception is way greater. And it's very interesting to see that, because in my eyes, someone going through this is like nothing. Like, sometimes I don't even notice the person shake. So to me, it looks like they did nothing. But when I ask them, they're like 8, 9, like, I'm not going to walk tomorrow. And I always try to get Dave to really pay attention to that, because it is hard to put yourself in those clients' shoes. Their perception of exercise has not grown, or their tolerance to exercise hasn't grown. So you have to really work with what they have. So if they say 9 and 10, they feel like they're not going to walk tomorrow. I say, okay, awesome. So next time you come in, you're going to do this one more time, and then you move on to 2 pages, because I want them to really gain some tolerance to this workout and gain some confidence. If they say, I don't know, 4, 5, I'll say, perfect. So next time you come in, you're moving on to 2 pages. So what you did today is basically going to be like 15 minutes. It'll be a warm up, and then you have a whole other day, like a whole other program. So now I can kind of adjust on the fly. If I'm dealing with someone who's very deconditioned, we just do this one more time, maybe 2. But I also deal with people who are very, very, very deconditioned. If we are dealing with someone who's pretty conditioned and this was nothing for them, then the next day they have a whole other program. And what that looks like, and I want to make it easy for myself, the warm-up looks very similar to that first day. I just cut some off of it. So I shouldn't have to show them over and over again. They're put into that semi-private, and they should already know how to do this. And then their transition program is a day 1 and a day 2. Since we started doing this, way better results. Progress people so much faster. So that means if they're coming in Tuesday and Thursday, they do this Tuesday, and they also do this Thursday. I used to give people an A day and a B day, but people need consistency, and I'm able to progress people faster if they just do the same thing. But what I have done is I've added novelty within these same days. So on day 3, and I point this out, on day 3, I'm like, you're going to learn ball slams. And then when I'm showing them the ramp squat, I'm like, and notice, like, on day 5, you're going to move to weight in. So I've added Novelty within the same program. And I also point out, I wrote an example, if they're doing landmine press and they did 12.5 on day 1, then on day 4 they're doing 15. I'm like, wow, you've already moved up to 15 pounds. That's amazing. And so they do this every day until they run out of the 6 days. And after that, and I'm also doing my modifications that I noticed on my day 1. Then they move on to like the ultimate program. And that's just like a regular program where they have an A day and then they have a B day. On here, you'll also notice, because I deal with the deconditioned population, I add finishers, and it also adds a novel experience, but I don't introduce it on week 1, just because if there's a flare up, I don't want them to blame the whole program. Like if they push it over the edge with the Echo bike and then they have a flare up, like I don't want them to be like, nope, that was awful, bad program. So I want them to be okay with this program. And if they do have a flare up when I push them a little harder, at least I can say, well, remember you were fine for 2 weeks, so let's just not do Echo bike. So you don't have to do it that way. That's just how I do it with people who are in pain.
Yeah, I like it.
And then that's really my initial few, like first 12 weeks or something like that.
Yeah. That's awesome. I appreciate that. You guys have any big questions?
No, feeling pretty good after that. It's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, that's why I was just asking like logistical. There's a lot of things I'm seeing as like pulling little pieces of like, how do we apply this idea? And it's like some of the things we've been trying to figure out with newer clients, more in our like small group class, like 4 to 10 people, which I think can be applied quite a bit. I especially like just the beginning of where you talked about like more of our description for reasons for doing things. I think we got to get better on that as a team. So I think that's a big part for sure.
Cool.
All righty. Well, I know we're at 90 minutes. I appreciate it, Lucy.
Wow, I did hit 90 minutes.
Yeah. No, but that's
It's either I just can keep going.
yeah, I mean, and I think it's important for, like I said, I could talk quite a bit on like programming implications for a lot of this for sure. But I also think it's a good thing for any trainers to be willing to share their actual process and how you react to certain scenarios. Because it's easy to just like throw out cookie cutter things. And I think this is good for us to see for sure.
Yeah, because that, to me, what I'm trying to prevent is from Sierra shouldn't have to be able to handle something that she can't handle.
Right.
So we don't want to introduce a move, for example, like deadlift, because people really struggle with deadlift. Yes, I could probably get someone there better than Sierra. So I don't even want to like put that in like as an option. So I don't want a client to do something that they're not ready to do or capable of doing just because I'm not there. So it's
Right.
really like a safe to fail program for the client that doesn't require that much skill set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes total sense. All right. You had shared this. So we do have access to it. I mainly wanted to see, I don't know how you feel about it, mainly the movement observations tab. I don't know how much you care for me to like.
Oh, the Google form?
Yeah, or if you go to your second tab, the movement. So after movement assessment, your movement observations tab is, I think, just like a gold mine. So all to say, I just was wanting to kind of copy that for my team. So I didn't know if that was possible.
Oh no, yeah, and that's why I made your own copy. So that's
Okay,
yours.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I think that's huge. Tyler and I have been talking a lot about like creating go-tos for our team of, you see this now, which routes do you go? Like you see that they're not able to roll their hips on a 90-90. Which route do you go? You see that they're feeling their neck on a quadruped. Which route do you go? And just giving them those paths is, I think, something that we're working on for the team.
Yeah, and I think what this will do, especially with someone like Kayla, if she's seeing all these exercises, it is going to start building that intuitive thought process, because you're going to see so many people try rock back and fail or succeed. So many people try hook line, fail and succeed. So you're going to start getting the reps in. So then your decision making will start getting more intuitive. Like, well, if this happens and that happens.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I appreciate it. I know you recorded it, so for Q and for us, like I said, we'll probably want to come back and watch some of this.
Yeah, I'll put it on YouTube and then send you the link.
Oh boy, we're gonna be out there to the world. But yeah, I appreciate it. Any final questions?
No, thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.
And then I'll be chatting with them. I'm gonna ask them if there's any other things from this that they would love if you deep dove farther on, and see if we want to come back to it.
Okay, cool.
All righty.
Well, thank you.
Very much. Enjoy and keep crushing your soon reopening, right?
Yeah, I think 2 weeks or something.
2 weeks. I like it. All right, Lucy, I appreciate it and have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
You're welcome.